A generation of new mines are opening up in Africa, and I think everyone in this state is keen to know whether they pose a threat to our golden goose up in the Pilbara. So to discuss that and other topics, please welcome my colleague, resources reporter Mark Wembridge to the stage as he investigates the world of iron ore with Ivanhoe Atlantic's Bronwyn Barnes, BHP's Iron Ore Asset President Tim Day, Fenix Resources Chairman John Welborn, and Fortescue's Director of Mining Operations Steve Cole. Excuse me, sir. Have a good one. See ya. Thanks, Minister. Would you like water? No. Water? Oh, yeah, sure. No, I think that one's used.
Thank you for that introduction, Tom. You summed it up perfectly. We'll just jump straight into it, I think, there. The first question is, what impact will the rise of Africa have on the Pilbara and on Australian iron ore? And should we be quaking in our R.M. Williams boots? I'm glad to see that Steve is wearing R.M. Williams boots. The boss will be happy. Would you take that one? What do you think?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Look, the boots are part of the perk of the job, so I'll take them whenever I can. Look, for us, from our perspective, Africa is just, it's another challenge. It's another ore body. It's present. We've got resources in Gabon that we're currently drilling, and to understand what that looks like for us from a future perspective. But look, our position is green iron. You heard Andrew this morning talk about it. Our role is to build it. We have a couple of technologies currently being in development, which with our pilot plant currently being built in Christmas Creek up in the Pilbara, we'll have some answers to that by the end of the year, with the intent of having a volume by the end of the decade. But of course, green iron doesn't come without green iron ore. You can't just magically make it. So our role, or my role in particular, is to deliver the 2030 real zero target of zero emissions, which, from my perspective, I've got nearly 1 billion litres equivalent diesel a year currently in use. So I have to get rid of that. And so that's my immediate goal from my perspective, and for the company, then that lends us straight into the green iron position.
But if green iron ore is so good, which is what we heard from Andrew this morning, why isn't everyone doing it?
Good question. Why not, is my view. Look, for us, it positions us well into that forward market. If you look at the Pilbara, we have we're blessed in our infrastructure, our ore bodies, both Rio, BHP, us, and others. There's nowhere else in the world you could possibly do it, I don't think. So we're jumping on it early. It helps us our CO2 emissions. It helps us bypass the furnace and straight into the electric arc, which you heard this morning around China and their willingness to decarb. It puts us on the front foot.
Tim, is green iron ore a fad? Will BHP be jumping in?
Yeah, look, I think just to maybe just on the Africa bit first, because there's a quality discussion around that, which I think is really important, and I think there's a context piece here that I think that's kind of missed in the conversation if we're not careful. Is that you're talking about a contestable market out there of about 1.5 billion or so tonnes of iron ore. So you look at that from that perspective, it's a massive market, and you think about what Africa is in this case, it's about 120 sort of maximum tonnes coming out of that particular piece, albeit quite good quality. So you put that in the context of that, and a market that is holding quite steady, frankly. So there's about 1 billion tonne of steel coming through China consistently now for a number of years. And you've sort of put all that together, and yes, it's going to impact the price, but overall it's going to sort of steady through. The other thing you've got to think about though is, and you look at like Woodmac reports and things like that, you've actually got about 250 million tonnes coming off capacity in the world as well inside that. So you're going to have these ups and downs over the decades around what happens in this space. So in terms of the context of that particular volume piece is really important. You then get into the biggest thing that you can control locally, particularly in Western Australia and in any sort of mining environment, is the ore bodies that you have is one thing you don't control, but the ones that you choose to develop and how you develop and how you run them is the things that you do control. So if you think about the WAIO operations, for example, we've got over 30 billion tonnes sitting within 50 k's of our main infrastructure lines, right? So you've got a really good set of resources there, and these are multi-billion tonne pits, like massive, massive holes. And we choose those pits in order of making sure we're getting the best quality we can through that. And that allows you to then get to the least amount of diesel burn, all the rest of it, to try and minimise the usage of that. So then you walk into other things like green iron and all sorts of things that you decide to do in that space. And I think Simon covered it quite well in his previous session around you just got to work through it. So whether it's a fad or whatever, but you've actually got to work through it. Well, you've just got to work through it as it becomes a reality or not. But you've got a whole heap of things that need to be true here, right? You've got labour things that need to be right. You've got capital investment needs to be right. It's how it flows, how it works within our current ore bodies, and then trying to maximise the use of what we've currently got. Like the Neosmelt, for example, to try and make sure that we've got the different technologies that are actually working on the Pilbara ores is a really important piece of the puzzle.
Mm. Bronwyn, just going back to Africa again, you guys are looking to export high-grade Guinean iron ore. You're going to be cutting the lunch of the Pilbara, are you?
Oh, I wouldn't have thought we're cutting the Pilbara's lunch. I think, our deposit is obviously high grade. We've only got 750 million tonnes, so from a competitor to the Pilbara project level, I don't think we're that much of a competitor. I think the other thing, with our project as well, is we won't be going to China. Mm-hmm. As a US company that's looking to list in Australia later this year, we've been very clear that our product will be going to Europe or the Middle East. So I don't really see us as a direct competitor to the Pilbara.
Okay. John, you've obviously had a lot of experience in Africa. It was Equatorial Resources and Resolute Mining. You know the continent pretty well, but you've come back to Australia from there and you have operations here. Sort of counter-cyclical, I suppose. Why? What's wrong with Africa? Why did you come back home?
I think, unfortunately, a stunning lack of success, Mark. I must be at a media summit because I'm intrigued at Steve and Tim. If they're listening to your boss, mate, you're struggling for a job. We're heading for a wasteland in the Pilbara. And according to Andrew, obviously, green iron is definitely not a fad. It's here to stay. So, but I'm also greatly pleased I don't have to feel so guilty about burning 1 million litres of diesel a month when you're doing 1 billion annually. So we've all got some challenges. The answer to your question, Mark, is I was inspired by the opportunities in Africa as someone who grew up here in Perth in the 1970s. These sort of summits are really interesting. If you cast some mind back, if we were sitting here in 1980, we'd be talking about Burma as our largest trading partner in Asia. So we've seen an incredible explosion of iron ore exports, which is driving the Australian economy. It's certainly built Rio Tinto, that we heard earlier from. It's certainly built Fortescue, and it's a huge engine for BHP. But the biggest thing is that China is changing, and I think the arc of history, though, about Africa, I went there full of optimism. I was at university when the Berlin Wall fell down. I remember at Netherlands Primary School going down to UWA and seeing the first computer there. It was the size of a room. I'm in my mid-50s, so it's not that long ago, ancient history, but forget how quickly things change. I went to Africa full of optimism, thinking that globalisation, technology, would reduce corruption and unlock the stranded deposits, the mythical stranded deposits, one of which is Belinga, owned by Fortescue, one of which is Simandou, owned by Rio Tinto, and there's Nimba, where Bromlin is working, and they're fantastic. But the answer to your question, I've come back to WA because of something Simon said. It is undoubtedly the preeminent mining jurisdiction globally. And the thing that I got wrong, among other, but not seeing that the world was going to take a streaming U-turn, and that in fact in the old days, African politicians were somewhat limited by the amount of money they could steal because you had to fit it into a suitcase, whereas now they can steal the whole country. That here in WA there remains stranded deposits that haven't been unlocked. So I'm looking forward to the Pilbara being a wasteland because we can guarantee that the Midwest of Western Australia is full of the high-grade ores that are going to feed the green steel revolution.
But that's the difference with you, isn't it? Your ore grades are higher. They're not... The
Oh, look, Fenix is mining a postage stamp high grade. I claim that it's the highest grade ore body on mainland Australia, mainly because Koolan Island, I'm claiming, is offshore from Mount Gibson. So we have a 65% ore body, but it's 10 million tonnes. These guys would mine it in a morning before smoker. And we're hauling it 500 kilometres on public roads and exporting from the port of Geraldton, which historically is interesting because it's where, in fact, Australia broke the embargo. Listening to Madeleine King about our strategic reserve, it's interesting to remember that Australia put an embargo on iron ore exports because we thought that we didn't have enough for our emerging country. And Lang Hancock and others lobbied the federal government to allow us to export iron ore. And the first iron ore shipment out of Australia was from Geraldton, from Coolyanuka. And that was before, obviously, we started to tip the earth on its axis by the amount of material these guys are moving north. The point being is that we're going to see change. One of the things sitting here in this room, there's so many eminent people, but a bit like looking at foreign exchange, the only thing we can get correct is none of us will see what's going to happen next.
Fair enough. Bronwyn, would you go back to Africa again? Can we get a sense of where you guys are going over there? And similarly, what it's like to do business in Africa, because we saw Resolute Mining, obviously, CEO held hostage for a couple of weeks. Hey, here's some cash. You're out now. It can't be the easiest place in the world to do business. How are you guys dealing with that?
Look, it's not the easiest place in the world to do business, but I'd also challenge that most places are not easy to do business, especially the kind of businesses that we're in. I guess I've been working across Africa for about 12 years and I've got about 10 years experience in working in Guinea. So I'm pretty comfortable, being there and working through the system of government and understanding how the process works to get a mining operation into construction and into development. I think Africa at the moment is a really interesting place to be, particularly as a US company. The new Trump administration is very focused on increasing its profile and access to resources in Africa. It's doing that through sponsorship and development of multi-user infrastructure corridors like, that we've seen with the Lobito corridor, connecting Angola DRC, which will eventually go across into Zambia and Tanzania. We're working very closely with the US administration on the Liberty corridor, which will connect Guinea into Liberia and create a new infrastructure corridor for materials to come out through that part of West Africa.
How have you been going with the negotiations to get high-grade iron ore put on the US criticals minerals list?
It's
on the Canadian one. It's work in progress.
It's a work in progress. And I certainly think there's a very clear focus of the current Trump administration to increase their defence capability. And I think people will have seen very clear statements around that. And the critical mineral supply list is very clearly being driven by the defence sector. We can't build a battleship without steel. So, I think there's going to come a point where high-grade iron ore will go onto the critical mineral supply list in the US. We do have very close relationships with both White House and State Department, and I spend a lot of time in Washington, as much time in Washington as I do in Africa. So I think that sort of very clearly demonstrates how interested the US is now in increasing its exposure and involvement in these really high-grade critical mineral, projects across the region.
Okay, just sticking with grades there, Tim, is BHP lowering its grades like Rio?
Yeah, so the grade one's a good one, right? Because we've got, like I said before, we've got a heap of iron ore up there. And the benefit we have is we've got these big ore bodies, and we're opening ore bodies that actually make sense for the overall grade. So the reason you think about some of our ore bodies like Southflank, which is an 80 million tonne operation, the reason we open that one is because it is a higher grade in terms of it gives us a lump premium accordingly. So the benefit of that means that we can stay stable consistently through many decades, to be honest with you, because there's such a big ore body out there. And the beauty of that is we've also got then big resources, like I said before, all within 50 kilometres of the infrastructure, so we can open the next one accordingly as we need to. But the point made this morning around depletion, these are big mines and they do run at a big rate. So if you're pulling 300 million tonnes of product out, that's quite a big ore bodies and footprint you need to continue to drive into these things. But grade as a topic, to answer your question directly, is something that affects us all. Like, you always start in the better areas in a mining operation, and you always go over time. So it is an area that you've got to keep a really close eye on. And you just got to make sure the batting order and the way you're working through that is giving you the best quality possible. Now, we always look at it from time to time, but yeah, we'll just keep working through it as we always do.
Steve, do you want to jump in there? How's it affecting Fortescue?
Look, not directly at the moment, similar to Tim. We've got 200 million tonnes a year. We have to keep finding. Look, you're constantly balancing your product suite with cost. It's a daily, particularly in Fortescue, it's a daily request. But it's something we just continue to monitor. But right now we're stable. Our ore body supports that for at least the midterm, and we'll pivot as we see required. But again, this is why we sort of push into where we're heading from a green iron perspective or a decarb perspective. That helps us potentially lower the cut-off grade, which means we can open up more ore that's already in our current footprint. So we're not having to go for more big approvals, big ore bodies, big mine sites. We can just continue to use what we have. So there's lots of value associated with that. We've got to track the technology, of course, which we believe we have. We've just got to demonstrate that at size now and then grow.
John, your operations are quite small compared with the big guys up north. How do you survive in such a tough environment with all the big guys around?
Well, I think we're enjoying a period of very sustained high iron ore prices. So, but we're changing our strategy is the answer.
You've done well out of hedging, have you not?
Yeah, we have. We've tried to do price protection, but that really just buys you time if you see the price evolving. Fenix was opportunistic. I liken the original business model as a pop-up shop. We were selling ice creams in the sunshine on the beach, and we're acutely aware that if it starts raining, we're going to really struggle. What we're actually now doing is changing a small volume, high cost business into a large volume, low cost business, and trying to copy some of the success of the large miners, but also with a unique model. It was interesting to listen to Andrew talk about the fact that we're all connected to the blast furnace industry, which he described as being a century-old technology of burning sticks and twigs and coal, in his description this morning around his belief in green steel. You know, there's been a couple of questions this morning around the iron ore industry and the impediments to change, whether it's Africa or grade. The reality is there's an enormous installed infrastructure in the billion tonnes of seaborne iron ore, and so that takes a while to turn around, railways and deep water ports and shipping. How we're managing is actually thinking of a new model. The iron ore was discovered in the Midwest in 1870. It was eclipsed by the Pilbara because it didn't have the billion-tonne deposits we've heard about that justify the building of large-scale modern railways. But that's an opportunity for a company like Fenix because there's actually lots of smaller deposits, and we're building a model around road transport and smaller boats around how to unlock those smaller deposits.
But what happens if the iron ore price drops to $60, which is what the Treasury forecast is for next year?
Well, we all make a little less money. Our break even at the moment is about $70 looking forward into next year. You're right that we've hedged in Australian dollars to protect both the iron ore price and the exchange rate. So we've got about 40% of our production hedged out to December. So that's a pretty short-term hedge. So we continue to look at price protection, but we're in a race to bring our costs down to hopefully rival the large-scale peers further north, and that's the challenge for a startup business. But the last thing I'll say about some of the things that we're talking about here is that, and it sort of flows on from the comment we've just heard, both these guys are really challenged about maintaining 300 million tonnes or 200 million tonnes. It's a big number to keep finding, keep extracting, keep that engine going. Fenix, we're tiny, we can be very nimble, we can react to no doubt the demand from the world's largest iron ore customer is for higher grade, cleaner products, and for in fact a complete change potentially to the industry. The iron ore industry started here small, it built itself, and now it's a huge engine. The next stage is going to be really interesting, and from a Fenix perspective, the answer to a question about how do we respond to grade decline, ore body decline, cost challenges, is where we have the capability to be nimble and flexible.
Mm-hmm. Just on costs there, both BHP and Fortescue claim to be the lowest cost producer in the Pilbara. Who's lying?
It's a two-horse race. There's a calculation. I think it was swings and roundabouts, and I think your body's always going to support that position. And you don't always get a smooth transition through the year. We saw a really good quarter that we just had from the third quarter. It's come down off our quarter one and two, and we'll hopefully maintain that for this quarter. But I don't know. I don't see Tim's books. He doesn't show me his, so I can't comment.
Just put some context in it. So we've well and truly been the lead in this for 5 years straight. Like, there's no doubt about it. You look at all the numbers, and you just go through it. You just check any number you like. And I think the way to think about it is and there's a reason. There's 3 reasons for that, right? So a lot of the reasons we have it is we've got a really big resource set up. So there is some natural advantages we have in this space, for sure. But then that allows us to then make sure we're really focusing this business on productivity and being that lowest cost producer consistently. And we've been gradually creeping that down for a long period of time now and continuing. And we'll just continue that journey over the next while. So, yeah.
Bronwyn, I want to get to you on the IPO market. It's pretty slow at the moment, not much going on. Why are you guys coming to market? How's it going for that matter? And why are you coming to market at this point in time?
Look, we wanted to come to market to obviously support construction costs for phase 1 and also educate the market about what the broader plan for development is at Nimba. And I think, when we assessed the market opportunities internationally, our options were really North America, so either Canada or the US, UK or Australia. UK we scratched out pretty quick. The UK markets are pretty flat. North America doesn't really understand iron ore as a commodity, and it's not very familiar with African projects generally. So when you're talking about, what's the market that understands iron ore, Australia is a perfect market for this company and for this product. And it also has a very strong familiarity of, African projects. It understands the challenges of working in Africa, but it also understands the opportunities. But a little bit more broadly than that, I think, at Ivanhoe Atlantic, we've got a bit of a bigger vision about what we'd like to do, not only with the Nimba project, but other projects that we're interested in acquiring. And I think being present on the ASX platform gives us opportunities to either acquire or partner with other existing ASX-listed companies on development of other assets.
John, Fenix, CZR, what happened?
Well, I'm not sure he's here, but Rio came over the top. They're really natural owner. It's interesting to hear Steve talk about the logic for the large miners in an increasingly challenging greenfields approval timeline process of maintaining their existing operations and looking to extend their existing bases. So I think Mark Creasy pegged the CZR tenements 20 years ago with the view that Rio would sooner or later need them. He's been very successful at having foresight in the industry. But I think he was surprised that Rio didn't move at various points, including when the Chinese company looked to have successfully acquired CZR, but then got held up by FIRB. So we saw a great opportunity there. What we do is mine. Our real skills are transport logistics and port operations, and we're doing that in the Midwest. And the decade-long search for a southern Pilbara port, whether it's Ballaballa or Anketel or Cape Preston East or Ashburton, really excited us. We sort of work backwards from ports to the opportunity to build a unique model to extract value out of known deposits. We don't have an exploration function. So Robe Mesa was something that we thought we could unlock, but we also recognised that there was a natural owner, and having eschewed the opportunity of acquiring the project for 20 years. Unfortunately, Rio woke up and decided they wanted to own it after we had agreed terms with Mark for an all-scrip takeover. So we chose not to exercise our right to match, and now we're focusing on the Midwest.
This comes down to your challenges about competing with the big boys, doesn't it?
Yeah, look, they're a natural owner. It's also about efficiency. I think if we should try and, as an industry, reward efficiency and expediency. And so building a completely separate logistics train when Rio Tinto have an incredibly efficient railway and mining operation doesn't make a lot of logical sense if you don't have to. So I think hopefully that's an appropriate and responsible outcome for the resources in the ground. And it's also allowed us to focus on our main game, which at the moment, we don't have any competitors from the large iron ore miners in an incredibly abundant iron ore landscape. Billions of dollars have been spent defining resources in the Midwest, and at the moment there's no one who's building a model that's going to extract them. And that includes some really interesting metallurgical magnetite projects that have the capacity to produce incredibly high value, high grade, low impurity concentrates. So at the moment we're a direct shipping ore small scale producer at probably the top end of the cost curve, and we've shown that we can make money doing that. And as I said earlier, we're in a race to change ourselves into a much lower cost, higher volume, sustainable business in a rapidly changing iron and steel market.
Happy to take some questions from the floor if anybody wants to put their hand up, and also on Slido. Before we do that though, I'd like to poke the bear a bit more here. Let's go back to industrial relations. Tim, unions coming to the Pilbara, what's going to happen? Are they really going to be striking? Are we going to go back to Robe River? Will they be striking over the fact that the canteen doesn't have chunky monkey flavoured ice cream? Is it scaremongering?
Look, I think the important thing is that we've got to get policy settings that allow us to be productive, right? So whatever the scaremongering is, all the rest of it is it just needs to be productive ultimately. And if you think about the Pilbara and Western Australia in general, but the Pilbara, its relationship with the workforce has been extremely positive for a very long time, and that's allowed the industry, but also the workers to be the highest paid workforce in Australia. Like it's a very well.
But it's not all about money, though, is it?
System.
It's about representation.
Absolutely. So you've got a whole range of things that play into that. So from the perspective of the businesses and all the rest of it, we've just got to make sure we work well with the workforce, the government, and all the policy settings accordingly. And we'll work under any environment, but it needs to be stable. And we need to make sure that that productivity agenda, which the federal government has mentioned, and we welcome that commentary, is actually kept to, because we need to be able to do that. And if you think about examples of where this is already showing up, and it's only fairly early days, I mean, we've got right of entries now. They're 400% up on last year. Like, they're massive numbers. And this isn't a right of entry just to a workplace in Perth here where they just come in and talk for a bit and go. It's actually, these mine sites are hundreds of kilometres long. So this is a huge exercise just to do right of entry. Now we're hiring permanent people now just to drive them around. Like, so if that's not the definition of unproductive, I don't know what is. So you end up in this consistent sort of piece that you've got to get right on this balance. It's quite a complex issue. Workers have got their rights, all the rest of it, that's fine. But we need to keep that business productivity sort of agenda playing for Australia, just to make sure we're keeping keeping ahead of the game for the global sort of game that we play.
Steve, do you want to jump in on that one? I think earlier on in the year, Andrew Forrest said something on the lines of that FMG staff didn't need to unionise because they had such easy access to management and everything was hunky-dory. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. I don't see us as it's not an us and them or an engagement issue. It's our team is our team, and there's no management versus workforce. That doesn't exist, to be honest. I've worked in other companies, bigger companies, and that can play out sometimes. We've just got a workforce who don't have to. You have to engage. They're willing to talk. They're willing to share. They're willing to engage, be part of the story. The industrial landscape is changed, sure, particularly over here. It's just another challenge that we've got in front of us. But look, right now we're in a good place, but as always, we have to keep our eye on it. But certainly no risk at the moment.
I'll take a question here from Slido. It's how does Western Australia's regulatory environment for exploration and mining companies compare to international jurisdictions, particularly in terms of approval timeframes and land access? Anybody like to jump on that one? No?
Well, maybe to make a general comment. Like, I think just as a general comment around, go back to my productivity comment, but it's about how do we make sure that regulatory environment allows us to keep everything hand in hand. So there's obviously nature positive conversations and the rest of it, but we've got to keep that in balance to make sure that, yes, we can move forward, but at the same time we're protecting. In terms of comparison, one of the things that is true inside of Australia is that things are taking longer than they have ever done. And that is just true. And you see other jurisdictions around the world where they're actively putting steps in place to minimise this down. And so that is something that we need to think about just as an industry, to make sure that we don't let opportunities and the real potential that we have in front of us, which is quite massive. You think about the change in the global landscape and the potential sitting in front of Australia right now. We need to make sure this is actually at the best sort of setting we can to maximise everything for Australia.
I think these things are cyclical in some way. In comparing, for example, what bromelain is currently challenged with in Guinea and Liberia and other places, and what the major miners and smaller miners here in Western Australia are challenged with, they're different challenges. We've seen African countries go through periods where they're enormously focused on attracting foreign investment, and they'll go out of their way to promulgate investment-friendly mining codes. And certainly when I first went to Africa and built and operated gold mines in Mali and Senegal and Ghana, all three of those jurisdictions were incredibly friendly and seen as very good. It was easy to attract foreign capital to invest in those.
You weren't held hostage for 2 weeks in a hotel?
Well, no. I was actually told by a hostage consultant once it was very unlikely I'd ever be taken hostage because I eat too much and I can't fit in the boot of a car, which was good news for a moment until he said, they just shoot. So luckily I haven't ever been taken hostage, so he's right on one thing. But I think that Mali, for example, has moved from promulgating and actually going to mining conferences like Indaba and handing out their mining code saying, look how good this is, come and invest in the country, to, how big a change in a little over a decade to actually locking up the managing director of a high-profile gold miner who produces probably 10% of their GDP and holding him hostage. So, comparing that to the Australian mining jurisdiction is obviously very favourable to operating in WA. I don't think any of the guys next to me are worried about not making it home at night after a meeting with Madeline or anyone else. But, however, they've also admitted, and I have seen in a much smaller way, in 2019, Fenix published a feasibility study to bring Iron Ridge into production. We successfully did that in 6 months, from a greenfields project. We're just about to do the same thing 20 kilometres away at a deposit owned by Sinosteel called W11. It's a very similar mine. These are little quarries. We run, 3-to-1 strip ratio, 1.5 million tonnes a year of ore. And it will end up taking us about 18 months to go through exactly the same. And in some ways, the W11 environment from a heritage perspective and an environmental perspective is a lot more straightforward. So we have a real insight into, it's a little bit different to being taken hostage, but the challenge for the industry is obviously to manage the competing interests of heritage and environment, and the stats that you mentioned about the real timeline from a project has blown out from 12 years to 20. Any NPV on anything in the world, doesn't matter if it's an esoteric rare earth or an iron ore project, if you try and do an NPV from start investment to first revenue of 20 years, it's going to be negative. So that's a challenge for WA. The challenge for Africa is to try and move back into an area where they understand the need for stability to attract capital. Hopefully the US government can help you out, Bronwyn.
Unfortunately, that's all we have time for. Thank you very much, everybody. It's been brilliant.